Hi, and welcome to this week's App Marketing Conversations. I am Ryan Morrell with GameHouse. As always, I'm here with Ian Sefferman of MobileDevHQ, Robi of Apptentive. How you guys doing?
Doing well.
Right. Got some dog hair on your shirt.
Always have dog hair.
So, interesting report came out this week from Flurry, I believe, about some of the change in demographics related to the number of games being developed and subsequently played on the App Store. So a year ago, it was 46% of games were being developed in the United States, and 76% of playtime happened in games that were developed in the U.S. Today, it's 35% of games developed in the U.S. and 70% of playtime. So obviously, we're seeing not only an increase in the number of apps available and the people using them, but of the globalization of where this content is coming from. So I think the open question for you guys is, if you are a new developer, especially one outside of the U.S., how do you think about entering the U.S. market as a whole?
Great question. I think by default I'm a homer. That's the way I am, and it's hard to break into other territories. There's no doubt in my mind that the app ecosystem in general is incredibly global, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to be successful outside of whatever country you've developed in. But it's clear that there are certain places which are easier to understand the culture and the impact than other places. The U.S. is actually probably easier to understand. I think most other countries sort of follow U.S. culture, and so if you're outside the U.S., making sure, I guess the primary point is follow the culture, make sure you actually understand the audience, right? It goes back to knowing your customer.
Yeah. I don't know if I was outside of the U.S. that I would think much of this. It doesn't feel like the options have changed that much. If I was outside the U.S. and I was like, oh, it's gone down a few percent, well, I'm either developing in English and launching in the U.S. or I'm not. I think my decision-making as an external developer isn't that different. I think if I'm successful in the U.S., I might start looking a little bit more aggressively internationally, and I think we've been banging the drum on international for a while. I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah. So maybe the second part of the question then is, do you even need to, right? If you're a developer in China, Slovenia, or whatever other country are producing a lot of content, is the market outside of the U.S. big enough that you don't even need to worry about it? Or not worry about it, but maybe not target it first.
Depends on where you are, obviously. My guess is Slovenia is not a huge market, but China's a huge market, right?
Yeah.
And the interesting thing that was also in that study, I think, was if you looked sort of by country of usage, who developed the apps that they were using, it was China was a small percentage for every country, except for China, where it became 64%, right? And every other place it was 5 or 10%.
Yeah.
And that's super interesting, right? Because certain places it's hard to figure out the culture. China's one of those places. Certain places they know that they have a market in their own country. China's another great example of that. So I think it kind of depends on your country, but if you're China, if you're potentially India, Brazil, those guys have big markets.
Yeah.
I think you're okay.
What do you think?
I don't have much more to add. I think that on that point, I think Ian's right. I think it's pretty simple.
Yeah. Okay. So ultimately, the message here is the data is kind of interesting, but it doesn't really change behavior. But we might be getting to a point where the app market is big enough, depending on your region and your country, that maybe the U.S. isn't necessarily your target market, and it probably once was.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, thanks for watching. Make sure to check out the segments from Ian and Robi where they talk about the change to the App Store algorithm. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks.